In this tutorial we're going to look at adding in beads to our Wirework macrame rings. We're going to start by looking at how we add them to the outsides to begin with, and then advance to having some on the middle and going around them. But first I'm going to show you in the cord. So I've attached the lazy strand to my board, and what I will say is if you want any beads in the middle, it is easier to thread them on before we actually attach the lazy strand to the board. So that's just what I've done here, even though the first part of the tutorial we're not even going to touch this bead, because later on I will. I've already threaded it on, and I'm going to secure the thread to the board now. I'm just going to push it through like that, and there we have my lazy strand ready. And I'm just going to keep the bead down here out of the way until I actually need it in a short while. I'm going to use this cord. It's an S-long cord as part of my working strands. The reason why I have chosen a different strand at this point is simply because I need to attach beads, and I need to use beads that are going to fit through this thread. That's something that you should bear in mind when you are making jewellery making. Make sure the tools that you're using together actually complement each other, and in this case make sure the thread can go through your beads. So I'm just going to do exactly as I taught you last time. I'm finding the halfway point, and then I'm going to draw the number 4, and with the opposite thread I'm going to come underneath the lazy and through the loop we just made. I'm going to pull them together. Now obviously if you were doing this to not show you the tutorial, you'd go up here and you'd do the full thing, but this is just to show you guys. So then I'm going to make the P on the opposite side, and obviously when you're doing this you're going to be doing it in a comfortable position. Your board, you're going to hold it. Mine moves around a bit because I've got it on a tile on here, so it slips around a bit when I'm filming. Obviously you won't have those issues, so just be aware of that. So I've made this second loop with your other thread. You want to bring it over. Sometimes when you're not really paying attention, you might put your, this thread over that one. So the one which we've used to make a P, you might unaware put it over the other strand, and that messes up the knots. Just always make sure that when you're doing it, have this knot out of the way. Draw your number, well, if it's a 4 or a P, whichever way you're going. Take the thread, and then, stay, go and do your lazy, and then finish your knot. Okay, so that's my first square knot. I've already shown you that properly and clearer in another tutorial, but this is just to show you how to add beads. Now I'm going to pick some random ones. If you were doing this, you would be likely to pick, complementary beads to the project that you're doing, but I've just picked a couple of odd ones that I've got laying around close by. They're nice and easy to use. Now, like I say, for this point I am just doing it so that they're going to go on this either side of it, so that we can make this look where we've got the beads on either side and not actually on the lazy strand. So you put a thread, you thread it on. I'm sure you know how to thread on a bead, so just thread that on. I'm going to have to do this off camera because I can't see from where I'm sat. One thing I will add is that you're as well to only add these as you go in on the lazy strand. I suggested obviously putting them on before you begin working. With your active strands it's the reverse. Okay, so I finished on this side, so we're going to draw the number 4 on this side, as again I've already taught you, and then using the opposite strand under the lazy, through the loop, hold it in place. And you want to be careful. This is the point that a lot of people make mistakes, because when they pull it, they automatically pull it so tight that the loop actually will then catch one of these, so it might actually go over a bead. I'll show you purposely. So say this bead moves over here, so then they go to catch it and it doesn't sit properly. You want to make sure that your beads stay here, and when you bring them together you tie a knot with both the beads sat in this point. And as you can see, it is coming loose. That's the thread I'm using to the size of the beads, but it will do that. You need to do the complete square knot to catch them in place. And I personally suggest, I wouldn't just do more beads at this point. I'd do a few more square knots. Make sure that when we do this second knot, that one hasn't moved. And there you go. We've got our 2 there. You just want to make sure that's there, and at this point I wouldn't add more beads. I'd do a few more square knots and then I add more beads, in the exact same way that I've done on these rings. Now we're going to encase a bead on the lacy strand to make a sort of flower shape. Now the beads I'm using are not ideal for a flower shape, but it's the only one that could fit on the thicker strand I've used in the middle. Again, this is just an example. You will modify it to whatever you use. I suggest using a bigger bead in the middle, seed beads around the side, but for this example I'm using some ordinary size beads and a bigger one there. And the amount of beads you use will be entirely determined by the size of the bead that you're trying to go around. So you thread your beads on to both sides, and after finishing with a full square knot just above, you bring that bead right up to the square knot. Okay, and you carry this on exactly as you would do normally doing a square knot. The only difference is that we've added these beads to each side, and we must take those into account. So we draw our number 4, we take our opposite thread, and we're going to go under the lacy, through the main, out the new loop. Okay, and this is where we pay attention. Like I said last time, we don't want to catch any of the beads in this. Now I could possibly get away with using 3 of these beads rather than 4, but as this is just for showing you the technique, I'm not that fussed. Again, you do it on the opposite side. Make sure those beads aren't getting caught. As you saw then, that one tried to go over that loop, over that bead, and I don't want it to do that. I'm going to bring my opposite thread through. Okay, and just be careful, make sure that they're not moving. If they do, just readjust them again. And close that with a knot. Okay, and then there you have the flower shape around. And in the exact same way as before, you would just continue doing square knots to make sure that it can't come loose. So that's the technique, and now we're going to do it onto actual wire. So I've got my materials ready. I have done a previous tutorials showing how I pick the size, how I do the loops, and even one of how I've made my own T-pins. So please go and watch those if you're not sure. We're just going to go straight into the tutorial here. You should have already seen a simple version of what we're doing here with a clear outline for those with dexterity issues in particular, but anyone who doesn't know, it was just an easy version. And I'm just going to use the T-pin, put that in my mat, use my wire. I'm going to try and straighten this a little bit more. Okay, and because I plan on putting a bead on what is the lazy strand, I haven't done my second loop at this point. I'm just going to add this on first. Okay, and then I'm going to do my other loop. I also gave an explanation as to why we do the loops in certain ways on that first tutorial, so please go and have a look to know more. But for this, we're just going to get started. Another good tip I do have is if you've made these T-pins yourself, sometimes these still want to move, and you can just bend these over. It helps to keep them in place. I'm going to go in my second T-pin, pull that down again, do the exact same thing on that side. So now that's not going to move as I am using it. So I'm just going to move my first bead down here, and I'm going to do the standard square knots like I've already taught you. Now we're going to start this in the same way we did the previous tutorial. I do advise you go back and watch it if you can. So we're just going to do a very simple square knot, and we've gone through the loop to begin with. Try not to let the wire move too much. And do it as tight as you can. Okay, and then you just start doing your square knots as normal. We've already done a full tutorial on this, so I'm not going to waste time on it. Instead, I'm just going to move my bead up. Now, on my previous tutorial, I would advise to keep going. So on this one, I've actually done the flower at the centre, so I've gone to about 2 inches, and then, well, you have to take into account obviously the size of the bead, so you want the bead middle to sit on the middle point. Be aware of that, otherwise it will end up too far to one side. But for the sake of showing you what we're doing, so we put that bead on, and then I'm going to thread some, I would use seed beads for this, but this is just a tutorial for you guys, showing you what to do. And again, the amount of beads that you use depends on the size of the bead you're trying to go around, and the size, obviously, of the beads on the outside. For my other wiring, I used a 8x6 rondelle and then 2mm rounds, and for that I used 5 on the outside on both sides. For this, obviously I'm using a lot bigger beads, so 3 is more than enough. And then you do your square knot as normal, just taking into account the wire where it is, the beads, making sure they're not moving too much. Okay. And in the exact same way we did with the thread, you have to come underneath, make sure that these beads, the wire isn't going around the beads, they're sat in the right place. You want to tighten that up. Okay, so it creates this flower-like look. I always try to use an odd number on each side. Obviously, if you did an odd number on one side and then so that it was odd as a flower, which I would advise if you were doing generally, but in this instance don't, because obviously that would end up with one down here and the knot being lopsided. It doesn't look right. But having 3 on each side, nature tends to do things in odd numbers, and you've got an odd number with that one in the middle. That's just my personal preference. I wouldn't have done, 2 or 4. I always try to go for 3, 3, 5, 7. Again, personal preference, but I just think it looks better. So that is how you do a very simple flower. and again, you keep doing the knots, you want to keep it in place. And I would do this in the midpoint